I woke up on February 3rd to the worst snowstorm Minnesota had seen in 5 years, and my first thought was not about the snow itself, but about how long it would take before Sharon Patterson, from the Oakwood Hills HOA, would show up at my door with her clipboard and her venomous smile. My name is Yates Donovan, and I had lived in this cookie-cutter neighborhood in Bloomington for 3 years with my wife Teresa, who worked as a dispatcher for the Bloomington Police Department. The storm had dumped nearly 18 inches overnight, transforming our quiet suburban street into a winter wonderland that would have been beautiful if it was not for the HOA rules that required all driveways and sidewalks to be cleared within 12 hours of snowfall cessation. The problem was that I had thrown my back out 2 days earlier moving furniture, and my doctor had explicitly told me no heavy lifting or strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. Teresa had left for her shift at 5 in the morning, kissing me goodbye and telling me to rest. She knew about the HOA rules, but she also knew about my back, and we had agreed that my health came first. I had called a snow removal service the moment they opened at 7, but they were backed up with emergency calls and could not get to me until late afternoon. That should have been reasonable enough for anyone with a functioning brain, but Sharon Patterson did not operate on reason. At 8:30, my doorbell rang. I hobbled to the door, each step sending sharp pains through my lower back, and opened it to find Sharon standing there in her pristine white parka with fur trim, holding her ever-present clipboard. She was 52 years old with blonde highlights that looked like they cost more than my monthly car payment, and her face had that pinched expression of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of finding fault in everything. "Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice syrupy sweet in that way that meant trouble. "I noticed your driveway and sidewalk have not been cleared. You are aware of the HOA regulations regarding snow removal." "Good morning to you too, Sharon," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Yes, I am aware. I have a snow removal company coming this afternoon. I threw my back out, and my doctor says I cannot shovel." Her eyes narrowed. "The rules do not provide exceptions for personal medical issues. The safety of the neighborhood depends on everyone maintaining their property. If you cannot do it yourself, you need to arrange for immediate service." "I did arrange for service," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "They will be here by 4 o'clock. The snow stopped at 6 this morning, so I still have until 6 tonight according to the 12-hour rule." Sharon made a show of checking her watch. "That may be technically correct, but I expect higher standards from residents of Oakwood Hills. I will be noting this in my report, and if your property is not cleared by noon, there will be consequences." "Sharon, the rule says 12 hours. I have a medical issue and a professional service scheduled well within that time frame. There is no violation here." She pursed her lips, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, looking for some angle to pursue. "We will see about that. I will be checking back at noon sharp." She turned and walked away, her boots crunching in the snow she was so concerned about, leaving perfectly good footprints all over my unshoveled sidewalk. I closed the door and immediately called Teresa at work. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the bustle of the dispatch center in the background. "Hey, honey, how is the back?" she asked. "Still killing me, but that is not why I am calling. Sharon just came by and threatened me about the snow." I told her about the service coming this afternoon, but she said she expects it done by noon or there will be consequences. Teresa sighed. "Of course she did. Look, do not worry about it. You are following the rules, you have documentation from your doctor, and you have a service scheduled. She has no leg to stand on. Just rest and let me handle things if she escalates." "You sure? I do not want this causing problems at your work." "Yates, I dispatch emergency services. If Sharon calls 911 about snow in your driveway, trust me, that is going to be her problem, not mine. Now go lie down and put ice on that back." We said our goodbyes, and I spent the next few hours alternating between lying on the couch with a heating pad and watching the snow continue to fall lightly. Not enough to constitute a new storm, but enough to dust everything with a fresh coating. At exactly noon, my doorbell rang again. This time when I answered, Sharon had brought reinforcements. Standing next to her was Marcus Webb, the HOA president, a barrel-chested man in his late 50s who owned a chain of car dealerships and loved reminding everyone about it. "Yates," Marcus said, his voice booming even when he was trying to sound reasonable. "Sharon tells me you are refusing to clear your snow." "I am not refusing anything," I said. "I have a medical condition preventing me from doing it myself, and I have a professional service coming in a few hours. I am in full compliance with HOA rules." Sharon held up her clipboard like it was a legal document. "Mr. Donovan, we have revised our interpretation of the snow removal policy. The 12-hour window is intended for normal snowfall. In cases of excessive accumulation, immediate action is expected." "That is not what the bylaws say," I countered. "And you cannot just revise interpretations on the fly to target specific residents. That is not how governing documents work." Marcus crossed his arms. "We are the governing board, and we determine how the rules are applied. You are in violation, and if you do not remedy this situation immediately, we will have no choice but to take action." "What action?" "You are going to fine me for following the actual written rules." Sharon's smile turned predatory. "If necessary, we will contact the authorities. Uncleared sidewalks are a public safety hazard. The police take these matters very seriously." I almost laughed. "You are going to call the police because my sidewalk is not shoveled yet, even though I have 10 hours left in my compliance window and a professional service scheduled. We will do what is necessary to maintain the standards of this community," Marcus said. "You have 1 hour to begin clearing your property, or we will make the call." They left before I could respond, and I immediately called Teresa again. This time she sounded more annoyed than concerned. "They are threatening to call the police," she said. "On a non-emergency line, I assume, because if Sharon Patterson calls 911 about your driveway, I am going to have a very different conversation with her. I do not know what they will do, but they seem pretty determined to make this a thing." "Let them try," Teresa said. "I am working until 11 tonight, so if they call, there is a very good chance it will come through me anyway. Just sit tight and do not engage with them anymore. Let them make fools of themselves." The next hour passed slowly. I tried to focus on a book, but my mind kept wandering to what Sharon and Marcus might do next. At 1:15, I heard a car pull up outside. Looking through the window, I saw a Bloomington Police Department cruiser parked in front of my house. My heart sank even though Teresa had warned me this might happen. A moment later, Officer Jason Chen, who I recognized from neighborhood watch meetings, approached my door. I opened it before he could knock. "Jason, I am guessing Sharon called you." He looked apologetic. "Hey, Yates." "Yeah, we got a call about a public safety hazard at this address. Something about uncleared snow and a resident refusing to comply with municipal codes." "Come on in," I said, stepping aside. "Let me show you the doctor's note and the confirmation from the snow removal service." Jason followed me into the kitchen where I had left the paperwork. He looked it over carefully, then shook his head. "So you are injured. You have a doctor's order not to do strenuous activity, and you have a professional service coming in less than 3 hours. And the HOA called us because your snow is not cleared yet. That about sums it up. Is there even a municipal code they can cite? Not that applies here. Bloomington does require sidewalk clearing within 24 hours for public safety, but you are well within that window, and you have taken reasonable steps to comply. As far as I am concerned, there is no issue here." He handed the paperwork back to me. "I will let dispatch know this was a non-issue. Sorry they wasted your time. Not your fault. Thanks for being reasonable about it." Jason left, and I watched through the window as he stopped to talk to Sharon and Marcus, who had apparently been waiting in Sharon's black Mercedes SUV down the street. I could not hear what was said, but from Jason's body language and the increasingly agitated gestures from Sharon, I could guess that he was telling them there was no violation and no police action would be taken. After a few minutes, Jason got back in his cruiser and drove away. Sharon and Marcus remained parked there, watching my house like vultures. At 3:45, the snow removal truck from Arctic Clear Services pulled up, and 2 workers began efficiently clearing my driveway and sidewalk. The whole job took maybe 30 minutes, and by 4:20, my property looked immaculate. Sharon and Marcus were still parked down the street, and I saw Sharon taking photos on her phone. I did not understand what she thought she was documenting, since I had complied with everything, but I had learned over the years that trying to understand Sharon's logic was an exercise in futility. Teresa got home at 11:30 that night, looking exhausted but also amused. She dropped her bag by the door and kicked off her shoes. "So I heard your call came through," I said. "Oh, it was so much better than that," she said, grinning. Sharon did not call the regular non-emergency line. She called 911. At 1 o'clock in the middle of the day, when we were dealing with actual emergencies, including a multi-car accident on 35W, she called 911 to report that you were endangering public safety by not shoveling snow. "You are kidding." I wish I was. I answered the call myself. She did not recognize my voice at first, kept demanding we send multiple officers immediately to deal with a hostile resident who was violating municipal codes. When I told her I was dispatching 1 officer to assess the situation, and that calling 911 for non-emergencies was itself a violation, she started demanding to speak to my supervisor. "What did you do?" I very calmly explained that I was following protocol, that her call did not constitute an emergency, and that if she had further concerns, she could take them up with the police department administration. Then I dispatched Jason because I knew he would handle it properly. He filed a report saying there was no violation, no hazard, and the call was unfounded. I pulled Teresa into a hug, carefully given my still tender back. "Thank you for having my back." "Always," she said, "but I have a feeling this is not over." Sharon Patterson does not strike me as someone who lets things go. She was right. The next morning, a letter appeared in my mailbox, hand-delivered despite the fact that the mail had not run yet. It was from the Oakwood Hills HOA, signed by both Sharon and Marcus, informing me that I was being fined $500 for violation of snow removal policies, and an additional $250 for causing undue burden on community resources by requiring oversight and enforcement action. I stared at the letter in disbelief. "They are fining me $750 for following the rules," Teresa read over my shoulder. "This is insane. You have documentation proving you did everything right. They cannot just make up fines because they feel like it." "What do we do?" "We fight it. First, you write a formal appeal citing the actual HOA bylaws, your medical documentation, and the police report. Then we go to the next HOA board meeting and make sure everyone knows what Sharon and Marcus are doing. If they want to play games, we will make sure the whole neighborhood sees it." I spent that afternoon drafting a detailed appeal, including copies of my doctor's note, the receipt from Arctic Clear Services showing they had been scheduled before the deadline, and Officer Chen's report. I cited the exact language from the HOA bylaws regarding snow removal, and pointed out that Sharon and Marcus had attempted to apply rules that did not exist in the governing documents. I delivered copies to both of them personally, along with a notice that I would be presenting the matter at the next board meeting, which was scheduled for February 10th. The week leading up to the meeting was tense. Sharon sent 2 more letters, each more threatening than the last, claiming that my appeal was frivolous and that failure to pay the fine would result in a lien being placed on my property. Teresa contacted a real estate attorney friend, who confirmed that, while HOAs did have the power to place liens for legitimate unpaid fines, doing so for a fine that was issued in violation of their own bylaws would open them up to significant legal liability. On the evening of February 10th, Teresa and I arrived at the community center where HOA meetings were held. The room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a table where Sharon, Marcus, and the 3 other board members sat. I recognized most of the faces in the audience, neighbors I had waved to over the years but never really gotten to know. There were maybe 30 people present, which was a good turnout for these usually sparsely attended meetings. Marcus called the meeting to order and began working through the standard agenda items: approval of previous meeting minutes, financial reports, updates on community maintenance. It was all mundane until they reached owner concerns and violations. Sharon stood up, smoothing her designer blouse. "We have a matter regarding 847 Maple Ridge Drive, the property of Yates and Teresa Donovan. On February 3rd, Mr. Donovan was found in violation of snow removal policies. Despite multiple attempts to gain compliance, the property was not cleared until well after the deadline. The board has issued appropriate fines, which Mr. Donovan has appealed. I move that we deny the appeal and proceed with collection." I stood up before anyone could second the motion. I would like to address the board and the community about this matter. Marcus looked like he wanted to refuse, but enough people in the audience were looking at me with interest that he nodded grudgingly. "You have 5 minutes." I walked to the front of the room and turned to face everyone. On February 3rd, we had a major snowstorm. 2 days before that storm, I injured my back badly enough that my doctor ordered me not to do any heavy lifting or strenuous activity. I have his note here. I held up the document. The morning of the 3rd, as soon as snow removal services opened, I called Arctic Clear Services and scheduled them to clear my property. They confirmed they would arrive by 4 p.m. Under our HOA bylaws, residents have 12 hours from the end of snowfall to clear their properties. The snow stopped at 6 a.m., giving me until 6 p.m. My service was scheduled for 4 p.m., well within the deadline. I looked directly at Sharon. At 8:30 that morning, Sharon Patterson came to my door and told me the snow needed to be cleared. I explained the situation. She told me she did not care about my medical issues and that she expected the work done by noon, which would have been only 6 hours after the snow stopped. When I pointed out that the bylaws gave me 12 hours, she and Marcus came back at noon and threatened to call the police. A murmur went through the crowd. I continued. "They did call the police. They called 911, which is reserved for emergencies, to report that my snow was not shoveled yet. Officer Jason Chen came to my home, reviewed my documentation, and determined there was no violation. I have his report here. The snow removal service arrived at 3:45 p.m. and completed the work by 4:20 p.m. I was in full compliance with all actual HOA rules and municipal codes. I pulled out the fine letter. Despite this, Sharon and Marcus sent me a letter fining me $750 for a violation that never occurred. They are attempting to enforce rules that do not exist in our bylaws and punishing me for following the actual rules. This is not about community standards. This is about Sharon Patterson wanting to exert power over residents who do not immediately bow to her demands. Sharon jumped to her feet. This is slander. You refused to comply with reasonable requests. You were rude and dismissive, and you created a safety hazard that required official intervention. I have Officer Chen here who would be happy to testify that there was no safety hazard and no violation, I said calmly. Jason had agreed to attend the meeting as a community member. He stood up in the back row and nodded. The call was unfounded, Jason confirmed. Mr. Donovan had taken all appropriate steps to comply with regulations. There was no issue from a public safety or legal standpoint. Another board member, Patricia Morrison, a retired school teacher who usually stayed quiet during meetings, spoke up. Sharon, did you actually call 911 about this? Sharon's face flushed. I called emergency services because there was an emergency situation of a resident refusing to comply with safety regulations. Snow sitting in a driveway for a few hours with a service already scheduled is not an emergency, Patricia said. That is a waste of police resources. Marcus tried to regain control. The board stands by our decision. The fine is appropriate given Mr. Donovan's attitude and lack of respect for community standards. Show me where in the bylaws it says you can fine someone for their attitude, I challenged. Show me where it says you can change the 12-hour compliance window to 6 hours whenever you feel like it. You cannot, because those rules do not exist. You are making them up to target me. This is ridiculous, Sharon snapped. If we allow residents to flout the rules whenever they have a convenient excuse, the entire community will fall apart. Today it is a bad back, tomorrow it is something else, and soon no one is maintaining their property. Teresa stood up from her seat. Sharon, you know who I am. Sharon looked confused by the question. You are Mrs. Donovan. I am also the dispatcher who answered your 911 call about my husband's snow. The call where you demanded multiple officers be sent immediately to deal with what you called a hostile and dangerous situation. Do you remember what I told you? The room had gone completely silent. Sharon's face went from red to pale. I do not recall the specific conversation. Let me refresh your memory. I told you that calling 911 for non-emergencies is itself a violation of municipal code. I explained that your call was taking resources away from actual emergencies, including a major accident with injuries. You then demanded to speak to my supervisor and threatened to report me for not taking your emergency seriously. Marcus stood up. This is highly irregular. The board does not need to justify its decisions to employees of city departments who have personal interests in the matter. Actually, you do, said a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see a woman in her 60s entering the meeting room. She had short gray hair and carried a leather briefcase. I am Ellen Richardson, an attorney specializing in HOA law. Mr. Donovan asked me to review this matter, and I have some concerns about how this board is operating. Sharon looked like she had been slapped. This is a private HOA meeting. You have no authority here. This is a meeting open to all homeowners in the community, and I am here as Mr. Donovan's legal representative. I have reviewed the Oakwood Hills HOA bylaws, and I found several interesting things. First, the snow removal policy clearly states that residents have 12 hours from cessation of snowfall to clear their properties. There is no provision for the board to shorten this timeline based on their personal preferences. Second, fines can only be assessed for actual violations of written rules, not for violations of unwritten standards the board makes up on the spot. Third, and most importantly, the board is required to provide due process before assessing fines, including notice and an opportunity to be heard. Mr. Donovan received no such process. Ellen walked to the front of the room and placed several documents on the board's table. These are the relevant bylaw sections, Minnesota state statutes governing HOA operations, and case law from similar situations. If you proceed with this fine, Mr. Donovan will have grounds to sue the HOA for harassment, improper enforcement, and violation of his rights under the governing documents. He will also have grounds to sue Sharon Patterson and Marcus Webb personally for abuse of their positions. The room erupted in conversation. Several other homeowners were standing up trying to ask questions. Patricia Morrison banged a gavel on the table. "Order! Everyone please calm down." She turned to Sharon and Marcus. "I think we need to have a serious discussion about this matter. I was not aware you had assessed this fine, and I certainly was not consulted about it. The bylaws require board votes for fines over $100. Sharon and Marcus exchanged glances. Marcus cleared his throat. "We acted under our authority as president and vice president to handle urgent matters between meetings. That authority is for things like emergency repairs, not for assessing major fines against residents," Patricia said. She looked at the other two board members, David Chen and Linda Martinez, who both nodded in agreement. "I move that we immediately rescind the fine against the Donovans and issue a formal apology." All in favor. David and Linda both said aye immediately. Patricia added her vote, making it 3-2 before Marcus and Sharon could even respond. "The motion passes," Patricia said firmly. "Sharon, please draft an apology letter to the Donovans and have it delivered by tomorrow." Sharon looked like she had been forced to swallow glass. "This is outrageous. You are undermining the authority of this board because one resident hired a lawyer to intimidate us." "No," Patricia said coldly. "We are correcting an abuse of authority by board members who decided to ignore our own rules. If you have a problem with that, perhaps you should consider whether you are fit to serve on this board." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with multiple homeowners wanting to voice their concerns about other HOA decisions and enforcement actions. Teresa and I slipped out after thanking Ellen, who told us to call her if Sharon or Marcus tried anything else. In the car on the way home, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. "I cannot believe that actually worked." "I can," Teresa said. "Bullies like Sharon only have power when no one stands up to them. The moment you challenged her publicly and brought receipts, everyone else could see what she really was." "You think this is really over?" Teresa was quiet for a moment. "With the fine, yes. But Sharon is not the type to forget something like this. We should be careful." Over the next few days, things seemed to return to normal. I received a curt letter from the HOA rescinding the fine, though it fell far short of an actual apology. My back gradually improved, and by mid-February, I was able to resume normal activities. Teresa's shifts at the dispatch center continued as usual, though she mentioned that they had started tracking improper 911 calls more carefully after the incident with Sharon. Then, on February 24th, things escalated in a way I never could have predicted. I came home from my job at a marketing firm around 6 in the evening to find a notice taped to my door. It was from the City of Bloomington Code Enforcement, stating that a complaint had been filed about my property regarding unpermitted structures and potential zoning violations. It instructed me to contact the Code Enforcement Office within 5 business days to schedule an inspection. I stared at the notice in confusion. We did not have any structures on our property except the house itself and a small shed in the backyard that had been there when we bought the place. I called Teresa immediately. "Someone reported us to code enforcement," I told her. "They are saying we have unpermitted structures." "We do not have any unpermitted structures," Teresa said. "The shed was already there and is under the size that requires a permit. This has to be Sharon. Can she do that? Just file false complaints with the city?" "Anyone can file a complaint, but if it turns out to be false, there can be consequences. Call the code enforcement office tomorrow and set up the inspection. Let them see there is nothing wrong, and then we can figure out where the complaint came from." I scheduled the inspection for February 28th. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Robert Mills, arrived at 9 in the morning with a clipboard and a camera. I showed him around the property, pointing out that we had made no modifications to the structure and that the shed was original to the house. Robert measured the shed, took some photos, and checked it against the city database on his tablet. "This shed is grandfathered in and does not require a permit. It is under 100 square feet and meets all setback requirements." He looked at me. "Do you know why someone would have filed a complaint about unpermitted structures?" "I have a theory," I said. "We have had some issues with our HOA. The vice president has been targeting us over petty complaints." Robert made a note. "HOA disputes are not uncommon, but filing false complaints with the city is a different matter. If you believe this complaint was filed in bad faith, you can request a copy of the complaint record through a public records request. It will show who filed it and what they claimed." I filed the request that afternoon, and 3 days later, I received an email with the complaint details. Sure enough, the complaint had been filed by Sharon Patterson. According to her statement, I had constructed multiple unpermitted structures, including a large shed exceeding size limits and a permanent gazebo in violation of setback requirements. None of it was true. We had no gazebo and the shed was clearly within regulations. Teresa looked at the complaint details and shook her head. "She is escalating. First the snow thing, now false complaints to the city. What is her end game here?" "Maybe she is just trying to make our lives miserable enough that we move," I said. "Some people cannot stand being challenged. Or maybe she is trying to build a paper trail to justify more HOA action against us. Either way, we need to document everything." I started keeping a file of every interaction with Sharon and the HOA, including dates, times, and any witnesses. I also began noticing things around the neighborhood. Sharon seemed to be paying an unusual amount of attention to our property. I would see her driving slowly past our house, sometimes multiple times a day. On March 5th, I caught her standing in our driveway, taking photos of our house with her phone. I opened the front door. "Sharon, what are you doing?" She jumped slightly, clearly not expecting to be caught. "I am documenting potential violations for the HOA. It is my responsibility as vice president to ensure all properties are in compliance." "Compliance with what? What violation are you documenting? Your gutters appear to be discolored." "The HOA standards require all exterior features to be maintained in good condition." I looked at the gutters. They were maybe slightly faded from sun exposure over years, but they were in perfectly good condition and certainly not a violation of any reasonable standard. "Sharon, you are standing in my driveway on my property taking photos. I need you to leave. I have the right to inspect properties for violations." "No, you do not. The HOA bylaws give the board the right to inspect common areas, not private property. You are trespassing. Please leave immediately, or I will call the police." Sharon's eyes flashed with anger. You would really call the police on a board member performing their duties. I would call the police on anyone trespassing on my property and harassing me. Leave now, Sharon." She turned and stalked back to her Mercedes, but not before taking one more photo of the house. I immediately went inside and called Teresa. Then I called Ellen Richardson, the HOA attorney who had helped at the board meeting. Ellen listened to my account and sighed. "She is absolutely in the wrong. Board members do not have the right to enter private property without permission. If she continues this behavior, you can seek a restraining order for harassment. In the meantime, I would recommend installing security cameras. If Sharon is coming onto your property regularly, you want documentation." I ordered 2 security cameras that day, one covering the front of the house and driveway, one covering the backyard. They arrived 2 days later, and I spent the evening installing them and setting up the cloud recording system. Teresa helped me test different angles to make sure we had clear coverage of all entry points to our property. "This feels excessive," I said as we finished the setup. "We are installing security cameras to protect ourselves from our HOA." "It is excessive," Teresa agreed, "but Sharon made it necessary. At least now if she does anything, we will have proof." The cameras proved their worth faster than I expected. On March 9th, I got an alert on my phone while at work. The front camera had detected motion. I pulled up the live feed and watched in disbelief as Sharon walked up our driveway, this time accompanied by a man I did not recognize. They spent several minutes examining the exterior of our house, with Sharon pointing at various features while the man took notes and photos. I immediately saved the footage and called Ellen. "Sharon is back on my property with someone else. They are taking photos and notes. I have it all on video." "Do not confront them," Ellen said. "Just document everything. If she is bringing someone to document supposed violations, let her. Every time she trespasses, she is building your case against her." That evening, I received another letter from the HOA. This time it was a notice of multiple violations: discolored gutters, lawn edging not maintained to standards, and house numbers not clearly visible from the street. Each violation came with a fine of $250, totaling $750. The letter was signed by Sharon and indicated that I had 7 days to remediate the violations or face additional fines and potential legal action. I looked at Teresa in disbelief. She is literally making things up now. "Our house numbers are fine, the lawn edging is perfect, and the gutters are normal weathering for a house this age. And she trespassed on our property to document these fake violations," Teresa added. "Ellen said to document everything. I think it is time to escalate this." We reached out to Ellen with all the documentation: the videos of Sharon trespassing, the false complaint to the city, the new bogus violations, and the pattern of harassment going back to the snow incident. Ellen reviewed everything and scheduled a meeting with us for March 12th. In her office, Ellen laid out our options. "You have a strong case for harassment and abuse of authority. Sharon Patterson has violated your rights repeatedly, filed false complaints with city agencies, and trespassed on your property. You can pursue several avenues. First, you can sue Sharon personally for harassment and seek damages. Second, you can sue the HOA for failure to properly supervise board members and for allowing this behavior to continue. Third, you can file criminal trespass charges against Sharon." "What do you recommend?" I asked. Honestly, I would start by presenting this to the full HOA board and demanding Sharon's resignation. Give them a chance to handle it internally. If they refuse or if Sharon retaliates further, then we pursue legal action. But it is often better to resolve these things without litigation if possible. We agreed to that approach. Ellen drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, outlining Sharon's behavior and including all the supporting documentation. She sent it via certified mail to all 5 board members with a cover letter requesting an emergency board meeting to address the matter. The meeting was scheduled for March 18th. Teresa and I arrived to find the community center more packed than I had ever seen it. Word had apparently spread through the neighborhood about what was happening, and people were curious. Sharon and Marcus sat at the board table looking defensive, while Patricia Morrison looked grim. Patricia called the meeting to order. We are here to address a formal complaint against Board Vice President Sharon Patterson filed by Yates and Teresa Donovan, represented by attorney Ellen Richardson. Miss Richardson, please present your case. Ellen stood and methodically walked through everything. The original snow incident, the false city complaint, the trespassing incidents captured on video, and the latest round of bogus violation notices. She played the security camera footage on a laptop connected to a projector so everyone could see Sharon clearly walking onto our property without permission. The room was silent except for her voice. When she finished, she looked at the board. Mrs. Patterson has engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment against the Donovans in retaliation for them challenging her authority. She has violated their property rights, filed false complaints with city agencies, and abused her position on this board to target them with illegitimate fines. This behavior is unacceptable and exposes the HOA to significant legal liability. We are requesting that the board remove Mrs. Patterson from her position and that she be prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership role in the future. Sharon shot to her feet. This is a witch hunt. These people have been violating community standards from the moment they moved in, and when I tried to enforce the rules, they hired a lawyer to intimidate me. Everything I did was within my authority as a board member. You trespassed on their property, Patricia said coldly. Multiple times. We all just watched the video. I was performing my duties as vice president. Your duties do not include entering private property without permission, Patricia said. Sharon, I have been concerned about your behavior for some time, but I gave you the benefit of the doubt. After seeing this evidence, I can no longer do that. You have abused your position and you have exposed this HOA to potential lawsuits. I move that Sharon Patterson be removed from the board immediately and prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership capacity for a period of not less than 5 years. Second, said David Chen quickly. Marcus looked between Sharon and the rest of the board. Wait, we need to discuss this. Sharon has served this community for 8 years. We cannot just throw her out because of one dispute with a resident. It is not one dispute, Linda Martinez said. I have received calls from other residents who said Sharon has been targeting them too. She told the Hoffmans their rose bushes were not the approved color. She threatened to fine the Nguyen family because their children's bikes were visible in their garage. This is a pattern. The vote was called. Patricia, David, and Linda voted to remove Sharon. Marcus abstained. Sharon did not get a vote on a matter directly involving her. Sharon grabbed her purse and stood up, her face twisted with rage. You are all going to regret this. This community is going to fall apart without proper leadership. I have spent years maintaining standards while the rest of you did nothing, and this is how you repay me. By siding with residents who want to turn this neighborhood into a slum. Sharon, you are out of line, Patricia said. Please leave before you make this worse. It cannot get worse. Sharon shouted. I am the only one who cared about this place. I am the one who kept property values up. And you are throwing me out because I actually enforced the rules. You did not enforce rules, you made them up, I said, unable to stay quiet. You harassed residents who did not do exactly what you wanted, exactly when you wanted it, regardless of what the actual rules said. Sharon turned on me. This is all your fault. You and your dispatcher wife think you are above the community. If you had just shoveled your snow like everyone else, none of this would have happened. I had a medical condition and followed every rule, I said. You are the one who could not accept that. I should have done more than call the police, Sharon said, and there was something in her voice that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I should have made sure you understood that actions have consequences. Is that a threat? Ellen asked sharply. Sharon seemed to realize she had said too much. It is a statement of fact. Actions have consequences, and the Donovans are going to learn that. She stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind her. The room erupted in conversation. Patricia banged her gavel several times before order was restored. I apologized to everyone for that display. The board will be reviewing all of Mrs. Patterson's recent actions and decisions. If any other residents feel they have been unfairly targeted, please contact me directly. For now, let us move forward with the rest of our agenda. Teresa and I left the meeting feeling relieved but also unsettled. Sharon's parting words had sounded like more than just angry bluster. On the drive home, Teresa was quiet, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. She said she should have done more than call the police, Teresa finally said. What do you think she meant by that? I do not know, but I did not like how she said it. Me neither. We should be careful for the next few weeks. Let the cameras run and maybe vary your route to work just in case. You think she would actually do something? Teresa was quiet for a moment. I have dealt with a lot of people in my job, Yates. Most of the time, when someone makes a vague threat like that, it is just anger talking. But sometimes, especially with people who feel like they have lost control, they escalate. Sharon seems like someone who has built her entire identity around being the HOA enforcer. Taking that away from her, that could push her to do something stupid. We were more right than we knew. Over the next week, small things started happening around our property. On March 20th, I found that someone had let the air out of all 4 tires on my car overnight. No damage, just deflated tires. On March 23rd, our garbage cans were tipped over and trash scattered across the lawn just hours before we got up. On March 25th, someone spray painted "Rule Breaker" on our mailbox in silver paint. Each incident was reported to the police, and each time they took a report but said there was no evidence pointing to who had done it. The security cameras had not captured anything because whoever was doing this was careful to stay out of their range or was coming from angles we had not covered. After the mailbox incident, I installed 2 additional cameras covering the street and the side of the house. Teresa was convinced it was Sharon, but we had no proof. She is trying to intimidate us into moving, Teresa said. Classic harassment tactics. Make life unpleasant enough that we leave rather than deal with it. Should we confront her? Not without proof. If we accuse her and we are wrong, she could sue us for defamation. And if we are right but she denies it, we have just warned her that we are on to her and she will be more careful. On the night of March 27th, the cameras finally caught something. At 2:15 in the morning, a figure approached our house from the street, staying in the shadows. The person was wearing dark clothing and a hoodie, making identification difficult. They walked up to our front door and appeared to be doing something with their hands. After about 30 seconds, they retreated back to the street and disappeared. I woke up to multiple motion alerts on my phone. Checking the footage, I saw the incident and immediately woke Teresa. We reviewed the video together several times, trying to make out any identifying features, but the person had been careful. Then Teresa had an idea. Check the front door. If they were doing something there, maybe they left evidence. We went downstairs and turned on the porch light. At first, I did not see anything unusual. Then Teresa pointed. Look at the lock. Someone had filled our front door keyhole with superglue. It had hardened, making the lock completely unusable. But that was not all. Looking closer, we saw that they had also spread superglue on the door handle. She is escalating, Teresa said. This is property damage, not just harassment. We called the police immediately. The responding officer, a woman named Officer Lisa Ramirez, took a report and reviewed the security footage. The video shows someone tampering with your door, but I cannot make an identification from this angle and lighting. Do you have any suspects? I explained the situation with Sharon and the HOA, including the pattern of incidents since her removal from the board. Officer Ramirez made detailed notes. Have you had any direct contact with Mrs. Patterson since the board meeting? She asked. No, she has not come by or called or anything. But these incidents started right after she was removed, and she made what sounded like a threat as she was leaving the meeting. What did she say exactly? Teresa recounted Sharon's words about actions having consequences. Officer Ramirez underlined something in her notes. I am going to have a conversation with Mrs. Patterson. Even if we cannot prove she did this, sometimes a police visit is enough to stop this kind of behavior. I am also going to recommend you consider getting a restraining order if the harassment continues. True to her word, Officer Ramirez visited Sharon that morning. I know this because at 11:30, I received a furious phone call from Marcus Webb. You called the police on Sharon again. He demanded, do you know how this looks? She has already been humiliated and removed from the board, and now you are trying to get her arrested. Someone vandalized our property, Marcus, multiple times. We reported it to the police like any homeowner would. And you automatically assumed it was Sharon because you are on some kind of vendetta against her. Marcus, she threatened us at the meeting. Since then, we have had 4 separate incidents of vandalism and harassment. The police are just doing their job. Well, Sharon is beside herself. She said the officer accused her of criminal activity based on nothing but your accusations. If this keeps up, Sharon is going to sue you for defamation and harassment. She is welcome to try, I said. We have documentation of everything she has done to us. Let her explain the trespassing and false complaints in court. Marcus hung up on me. I called Ellen Richardson and updated her on everything that had happened. She listened carefully and then made a recommendation. I think it is time to pursue that restraining order. You have enough of a pattern now to demonstrate ongoing harassment, and the property damage pushes this into criminal territory. Even if we cannot prove Sharon was personally responsible for each incident, we can show a pattern that started after she was removed from the board in retaliation for your complaints. Over the next few days, Ellen helped us prepare the paperwork for a harassment restraining order against Sharon Patterson. We compiled all the evidence: the original snow incident, the trespassing videos, the false city complaint, the bogus HOA violations, and the recent vandalism incidents. We included statements from witnesses at the board meeting who heard Sharon's threat. The petition was filed on April 2nd, and a temporary order was granted pending a hearing scheduled for April 15th. The temporary order prohibited Sharon from coming within 500 feet of our property or contacting us directly. A sheriff's deputy served her with the order on April 3rd. That evening, I was working in my home office when Teresa called from the dispatch center. Her voice was tight with stress. Yates, I need you to listen carefully. Sharon just called 911 again. What? Why? She is claiming that you attacked her. She said you came to her house and assaulted her, and she is barricaded inside and afraid for her life. My stomach dropped. Teresa, I am at home. I have been here since 5 o'clock. I have not been anywhere near her house. I know that, but I have to dispatch units to respond. Can you prove you have been home? I looked around frantically. I was on a work video call from 5 until 6:15. I can get the records. And the security cameras, they show me coming home and not leaving. Get that evidence ready now. Officers are going to Sharon's house and they are going to want to talk to you. If she is making a false report, we need to prove it fast. I immediately pulled up my work laptop and took screenshots of the video call logs showing I had been in a meeting with 3 coworkers and my boss from 5 until 6:15. I pulled up the security camera footage showing my car pulling into the driveway at 4:50 and not leaving. I was saving everything to a flash drive when there was a knock on the door. 2 officers stood on my porch, one of them Officer Ramirez. "Mr. Donovan, we need to ask you some questions about an incident at 923 Oakwood Court." "That is Sharon Patterson's address," I said. "Officer, I have not been there. I have been home all evening. I can prove it." I showed them the video call logs and the security footage. Officer Ramirez reviewed everything carefully. "This shows you have been here since before 5. Mrs. Patterson claims the assault occurred at 6:30. Do you have footage covering that time?" I pulled up the footage from 6:15 to 7. It clearly showed my car in the driveway, no one coming or going, and me visible through the home office window at various points. The other officer, whose name tag read Hernandez, spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We have confirmed the complainant's account does not match the evidence. Subject has a solid alibi with video proof. Advise responding units." Officer Ramirez looked at me seriously. "Mr. Donovan, this is the second time Mrs. Patterson has made a false report involving you. The first was the 911 call about the snow, now this. Making a false police report is a crime. We are going to have a very different conversation with her now." After the officers left, I called Teresa back. They confirmed I am in the clear. "They are talking to Sharon about filing a false report. I heard it come through dispatch," Teresa said. "Yates, she is spiraling. First the vandalism, now false police reports. She is trying to get you arrested. What happens now? Now the police decide whether to charge her." Making a false police report is a misdemeanor in Minnesota, but given that this is her second false report, and she did it in apparent retaliation for the restraining order, they might take it seriously. They did. On April 5th, Sharon Patterson was charged with making a false police report. She was arrested, processed, and released on her own recognizance pending trial. I learned this when the prosecutor's office called to let me know I would be needed as a witness. The harassment restraining order hearing on April 15th was almost anticlimactic. Ellen presented all our evidence, including the new false police report charge. Sharon's attorney, a nervous-looking man who seemed uncomfortable with his client, tried to argue that Sharon was the real victim, being targeted by us because we disagreed with her HOA enforcement. The judge was not impressed. "Mrs. Patterson, I have reviewed all the evidence in this case," Judge Michelle Torres said. "You have engaged in a pattern of harassment against the petitioners that has escalated from trespassing to property damage to filing false police reports. The evidence clearly supports the issuance of a permanent restraining order. You are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of the petitioners or their property, from contacting them directly or indirectly, and from making any further complaints about them to the HOA, city agencies, or law enforcement, except through your attorney." Any violation of this order will result in your immediate arrest. Do you understand? Sharon, looking diminished and older than her years, nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I am also ordering you to pay the petitioner's attorney fees in the amount of $4,500. This hearing is concluded. As we left the courthouse, Ellen pulled us aside. The false police report charge is still pending. That will probably result in a plea deal with probation and a fine, but the restraining order should stop the harassment. If she violates it, she goes to jail, and most people are not willing to risk that. So it is finally over, I asked. Most likely. People like Sharon usually back down when they face real consequences. Just keep the cameras running and document anything unusual. For 2 weeks, everything was quiet. Sharon stayed away, the vandalism stopped, and life started to feel normal again. Teresa and I began to relax, thinking maybe the nightmare was finally over. Then, on April 30th, everything exploded in a way that none of us had anticipated. I was at work when I got a call from Officer Ramirez. "Mr. Donovan, are you and your wife at home right now?" "No, I am at work and Teresa is at the dispatch center." "Why?" "Because we just arrested Sharon Patterson in your backyard. She was in the process of trying to break into your house." I felt like I had been hit in the chest. "What?" "Your security system alerted a monitoring company when a back window was forced open. They called us, and we responded. Mrs. Patterson was found inside your property with a crowbar and a can of gasoline." "Mr. Donovan, based on the evidence, we believe she was planning to set fire to your house." I could barely process what I was hearing. "She was going to burn down our house. It appears that way." "She is being held on charges of attempted arson, attempted burglary, and violation of the restraining order. Given the severity, bail is being set high. I need you to come home so we can document the damage and collect evidence." I left work immediately and called Teresa, who was equally shocked. By the time we got home, there were police cars everywhere. Officer Ramirez walked us through what had happened. The monitoring company had called 911 when the window sensor was triggered. Officers arrived within 4 minutes and found Sharon in the backyard, trying to pry open the back door after failing to get in through the window. The crowbar and a 5-gallon gas can were found near where she had been standing. "Did she say anything?" Teresa asked. "She claimed she was trying to retrieve something she had left on your property when she was still on the HOA board. But she could not explain the gas can or why she was using a crowbar. She also could not explain why she thought it was acceptable to violate a restraining order. Honestly, Mrs. Donovan, I think she had a breakdown. This does not seem like the behavior of someone thinking rationally." The back window had been damaged but not actually breached. The frame was splintered where Sharon had tried to force it. Officer Ramirez took extensive photos and measurements. Another officer collected the crowbar and gas can as evidence. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now she sits in jail until her arraignment. The county attorney will file formal charges. Given that this is attempted arson in addition to the restraining order violation, she is looking at serious prison time if convicted. The county attorney may offer a plea deal, but with your home security footage and the physical evidence, this is a very strong case." Over the next few days, the story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. I had neighbors I had never spoken to before stopping by to express their shock and support. Several told me stories of their own negative experiences with Sharon, things they had never reported because they did not think anyone would believe them or they did not want the hassle. Marcus Webb came by on May 3rd, looking haggard. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I defended Sharon when I should have listened. I thought you were exaggerating or being oversensitive, but I was wrong. I am sorry." I appreciate that, Marcus. Did you have any idea she was capable of something like this? No. I knew she could be intense about HOA rules, but I never thought she would try to burn down someone's house. The police found journals in her house during a search. She had been documenting everything you did, every time you came or went, every visitor you had. It was obsessive. That is terrifying. It is. The board is discussing disbanding entirely or at least completely restructuring. A lot of people are questioning whether HOAs are worth it if they can lead to situations like this. Sharon's arraignment was on May 6th. She was formally charged with attempted arson in the first degree, attempted burglary in the second degree, and violation of a restraining order. The county attorney recommended bail be set at $100,000 given the severity of the charges and Sharon's demonstrated willingness to violate court orders. The judge agreed, and Sharon's family was unable to post the bail. She remained in custody. Ellen Richardson contacted us with an update on May 10th. The county attorney has offered Sharon a plea deal. If she pleads guilty to attempted burglary and violation of the restraining order, they will drop the arson charge. She would get 5 years in prison with possibility of parole after 3. Her attorney is recommending she take it because if she goes to trial and is convicted on all charges, she is looking at 15 to 20 years. What do you think she will do? Teresa asked. Her attorney says she is having trouble accepting that she did anything wrong. She keeps insisting she was trying to help the neighborhood by dealing with problem residents. But facing 15 to 20 years tends to concentrate the mind. My guess is she takes the deal. Sharon took the plea deal on May 20th. She stood before Judge Torres and pleaded guilty to attempted burglary and violation of a restraining order. The arson charge was dropped, though the prosecutor made it clear on the record that they had strong evidence to support it. Sharon was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after serving 3 years. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the damage to our property and to have no contact with us for a period of 10 years after her release. As Sharon was led away in handcuffs, she looked at Teresa and me one last time. There was no anger in her face anymore, just a kind of hollow bewilderment, as if she could not understand how trying to enforce HOA rules had led her to this moment. The HOA held an emergency meeting on May 25th to discuss the future of the organization. Patricia Morrison opened by acknowledging that the HOA's structure had allowed someone like Sharon to abuse power without sufficient checks and balances. We need to decide whether to continue with substantial reforms or to dissolve the HOA entirely, Patricia said. I am open to either option, but we need a consensus from the community. The debate went on for over 2 hours. Some residents wanted to dissolve the HOA completely, arguing that the risks outweighed any benefits. Others wanted to keep it but with major reforms. Term limits for board members, required approval from multiple board members for any enforcement action, and an independent review process for complaints. In the end, the community voted to keep the HOA but with significant changes. The bylaws were rewritten to prevent any single board member from taking action without full board approval. All enforcement actions would require documentation and review. Board members would serve maximum 2-year terms with a 2-term limit. And an ombudsman position was created to receive complaints about board members and investigate potential abuses of authority. Teresa and I were asked to serve on the committee to draft the new bylaws, which felt ironic given how much trouble the HOA had caused us. But we agreed, figuring we had as much experience as anyone in knowing what could go wrong. By the end of June, life had mostly returned to normal. The damage to our back window was repaired. The security cameras remained in place, though we checked them less obsessively now. Teresa continued her work at the dispatch center, where the Sharon Patterson incidents had become a cautionary tale in training sessions about identifying improper use of emergency services. I ran into Patricia Morrison at the grocery store in early July. She stopped to thank me for my work on the bylaws committee. "I know this whole situation was awful for you and Teresa," she said. "But in a weird way, it might end up making our community stronger. We are talking to each other more, paying attention to how the HOA operates." Sharon's actions were terrible, but they woke people up. "I guess that is one way to look at it," I said, "though I would have preferred to learn those lessons without someone trying to burn down my house." Patricia laughed sadly. "I cannot argue with that. How are you and Teresa doing? Really?" "We are okay. It was scary for a while, and honestly, it was hard to feel safe in our own home knowing someone was targeting us. But the new security system helps, and knowing Sharon is in prison helps. Mostly, we are just trying to move on. Well, if you ever need anything, let me know." The least the HOA can do after everything is to be actually helpful for once. In August, we got a letter from the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Sharon had been assigned to a prison in Shakopee and had requested to send us a letter. We had the right to refuse to receive it, but curiosity got the better of us and we agreed. The letter arrived a week later. It was handwritten on prison stationery, and Sharon's normally perfect handwriting was shaky and uncertain. "Dear Yates and Teresa," it began. "I am writing to you from prison, which is a sentence I never imagined I would write. I have had a lot of time to think about what happened, and I am trying to understand how I ended up here. My therapist says I was suffering from a need for control that became pathological. She says that when you challenged me about the snow, it triggered something in me, a fear that if I did not maintain absolute control over the community, everything would fall apart. I know that sounds crazy now. It is crazy. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness because I do not deserve it. What I did was wrong on every level. I trespassed on your property, I harassed you, I filed false reports, and I tried to break into your home. If I am being completely honest, I do not even know what I was planning to do that day. I told myself I was just going to look around, but I brought gasoline, so some part of me must have been planning something terrible. I am grateful that I was stopped before I did something even worse. I am sorry for the fear and stress I caused you. I am sorry for abusing my position in the HOA. I am sorry for being the kind of person who thought enforcing rules was more important than treating people with basic human decency. I hope you can eventually find peace, even if you can never forgive me. Sharon Patterson. Teresa and I read the letter together in silence. When we finished, Teresa put it back in the envelope. "Do you believe her?" I asked. "I think she believes what she is saying right now," Teresa said. "Whether that will last or whether it is just something her therapist coached her to say, I do not know. Either way, it does not change what she did." "No, it does not, but at least she acknowledged it." We filed the letter away with all the other documentation from the case and tried to focus on moving forward. The new HOA structure was working well. Patricia Morrison had been elected president under the new term-limited system, and the board was operating with much more transparency and accountability. There had been no enforcement actions since the new bylaws took effect, and when minor issues came up, board members would talk to residents informally first, rather than immediately issuing violation notices. In September, Teresa was promoted to senior dispatcher, a recognition of her years of excellent service and her handling of the situation with Sharon. Her supervisors specifically cited her professionalism in dealing with the false emergency calls, and her work helping to improve protocols for identifying improper use of emergency services. We celebrated with dinner at our favorite restaurant in Bloomington, and as we sat there talking about everything that had happened over the past 7 months, I realized something. "You know what the craziest part of this whole thing is?" I said. "It all started because I hurt my back and could not shovel snow for a few hours." Teresa raised her wine glass to proportionate responses and reasonable people. "We should start a support group," I joked. "Survivors of HOA overreach." You laugh, but I bet we would have a lot of members. As we drove home that night, past the neat rows of houses in Oakwood Hills, I thought about how something as mundane as a homeowners association could spiral into something so dark. Sharon Patterson had started with what she probably saw as good intentions, wanting to maintain community standards and property values. But without checks on her authority, and with a personality that craved control, those good intentions had twisted into something toxic and eventually criminal. The snow from that February storm was long gone, replaced by the first hints of fall colors on the trees lining our street. Our gutters, the ones Sharon had claimed were discolored and in violation of standards, looked exactly the same as every other house on the block. Our house numbers, which she had said were not clearly visible, were identical to our neighbors. The shed in our backyard, which she had reported to the city as an unpermitted structure, sat quietly where it had been for 20 years. None of it had ever been about actual violations or community standards. It had been about power and control and what happens when someone cannot accept being challenged. And it had almost cost us our home and possibly our lives, but we had survived it. The security cameras remained, a permanent reminder to stay vigilant. The documentation we had compiled filled 2 thick binders that sat in our home office. The restraining order, now permanent, would expire in 10 years, right around the time Sharon would potentially be released from prison. In October, we received notice that Sharon's husband had filed for divorce and was selling their house in Oakwood Hills. A young couple with a baby moved in 2 weeks later. They seemed nice, and when I introduced myself, I did not mention what had happened with the previous owner. Some stories are better left in the past. The HOA sent out its monthly newsletter, now with a new format that included financial transparency reports and summaries of all board decisions. Patricia had written a message thanking the community for the patience during the transition to the new structure, and noting that participation in HOA meetings was at an all-time high. "People are actually engaged now," she wrote. "They are paying attention to how their HOA operates and holding us accountable. This is how it should have always been." Teresa and I attended the November HOA meeting, the first one we had been to since Sharon's removal in March. The atmosphere was completely different. Board members were friendly and professional. When residents raised concerns, they were discussed reasonably, and solutions were found through conversation rather than enforcement action. It was, dare I say it, actually pleasant. After the meeting, a neighbor named Jennifer Liu approached us. "I wanted to thank you for what you did," she said. "I know it was awful for you, but you standing up to Sharon made it possible for the rest of us to do the same. She had been terrorizing people for years, and everyone was too afraid to challenge her." "We were just trying to follow the rules," I said. "Exactly. And that should not have been controversial. But Sharon had made it clear that following the rules was not enough unless you did it her way on her timeline with the attitude she demanded. You showed everyone that was not acceptable." As we walked home that night, past houses decorated for Thanksgiving, I thought about what Jennifer had said. We had not set out to be heroes or to reform the HOA or to expose Sharon's behavior. We had just wanted to follow our doctor's orders and clear our snow when the service could get there. Everything else had happened because Sharon could not accept that reasonable approach. "You regret buying the house here?" Teresa asked as we reached our driveway. I thought about it. "Sometimes. When I think about what Sharon tried to do, yeah, but this is our home. We should not have to leave because someone else could not handle their authority responsibly." Agreed. Plus, the new HOA structure is actually working. Who knows, maybe we helped create something better. Maybe, though I still think we paid too high a price for that lesson. Teresa squeezed my hand. "We did, but we survived it. That is what matters." The holidays passed quietly. Sharon remained in prison, serving her sentence. We heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was participating in counseling programs and had become a model prisoner. I did not know if that meant she had genuinely changed, or if she was just good at following rules when someone else was enforcing them. On February 3rd, 1 year after the snowstorm that started everything, Minnesota got hit with another major winter storm. This time I was healthy, and I went out that afternoon to clear our driveway and sidewalk myself. Several neighbors were doing the same, and we waved to each other as we worked. No one was timing anyone or taking photos or making complaints. It was just people dealing with winter weather in Minnesota, the way it should be. As I finished the last section of sidewalk, I saw Patricia Morrison walking by with her dog. She stopped to chat. "Looks good," she said, gesturing to my cleared driveway. "Thanks." "Learned my lesson about letting it pile up," I joked. Patricia smiled, but there was a serious note in her voice when she responded. "You know, what happened with Sharon changed how I think about HOAs and community leadership. I used to think the most important thing was enforcing standards. Now I realize the most important thing is treating residents like human beings who are doing their best. Rules matter, but people matter more. I wish Sharon had learned that before she ended up in prison. So do I. But at least now we are building something better. That is her legacy, even if it is not the one she intended." After Patricia continued her walk, I stood in my driveway looking at our house. The security cameras were visible on the corners, silent guardians against threats that hopefully would never come again. The front door had a new lock after the superglue incident. The back window had been replaced with a more secure model. Our home bore the marks of Sharon's campaign against us, but it was still our home. Teresa came out the front door with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Figured you could use this after all that shoveling." We stood together on our front porch, watching the sun set through the bare tree branches, turning the snow golden and pink. The neighborhood was quiet except for the scrape of a few remaining shovels and the distant laughter of kids playing in the snow. "Next year, if it snows and I hurt my back again, what do we do?" I asked. "We call the snow removal service, we follow the rules, and we trust that the HOA has learned its lesson," Teresa said. "And if anyone gives us trouble, we know how to handle it now. Document everything and lawyer up. Document everything and lawyer up," she agreed. We clinked our mugs together and went back inside our warm house, where the security system blinked its steady green light and life went on. One day at a time, in the neighborhood that had almost torn itself apart over snow in a driveway. The story of Sharon Patterson became a cautionary tale, not just in Oakwood Hills but in HOA communities throughout Minnesota. Ellen Richardson told us she had been contacted by several other attorneys handling HOA dispute cases, asking about the details of what had happened. Some HOA management companies started using the case as a training example of what can go wrong when board members are given too much authority without oversight. In March, a local news station did a story on HOA reform, using Oakwood Hills as an example of a community that had faced a crisis and emerged stronger. They interviewed Patricia Morrison, several other board members, and some residents. They asked to interview Teresa and me, but we declined. We had lived through it and testified about it in court. That was enough. We did not need to relive it on television. The story aired anyway, using court documents and public records. They obtained footage of Sharon's arrest from the body cameras of the responding officers. Watching it was surreal, seeing this woman who had terrorized us for months looking small and confused as she was handcuffed in our backyard. The gasoline can sat in the grass behind her, evidence of what she had been planning. The news anchor called it a shocking example of HOA enforcement gone dangerously wrong. In the aftermath of the news story, the Oakwood Hills HOA received inquiries from researchers studying HOA governance and from other communities looking to reform their own associations. Patricia handled most of these, patiently explaining the changes we had made and why they were necessary. She was always careful to note that what happened with Sharon was an extreme case, but that the underlying issues, unchecked authority and lack of accountability, were common in HOAs across the country. Spring arrived, and with it, the usual HOA concerns about lawn care and landscaping. But even these were handled differently now. Instead of violation notices, board members would have conversations. Instead of fines, there were offers of help. When elderly Mr. Chen on Oak Street could not keep up with his yard work, the HOA connected him with a volunteer group of neighborhood teens who maintained his lawn for free. "This is what community actually means," Patricia said at the April board meeting. Not enforcing rules for the sake of enforcing rules, but helping each other and solving problems together. It sounded idealistic, maybe even naive, but it was working. Property values in Oakwood Hills had not collapsed without Sharon's iron fist. If anything, they had gone up slightly as word spread that the neighborhood had reformed its HOA into something reasonable and functional. People wanted to live in a community where they would be treated fairly, not subjected to arbitrary enforcement and harassment. In May, Teresa and I celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary with a trip to Duluth, getting away from Bloomington and the memories of the previous year. We walked along Lake Superior, ate at nice restaurants, and tried not to talk about HOAs or Sharon Patterson or any of it. It was good to remember that our life was bigger than that one terrible chapter. On our last evening in Duluth, as we watched the sunset over the lake, Teresa brought it up anyway. "I am proud of how we handled everything," she said. "We could have moved away or just paid the fines to make the harassment stop, but we stood up for ourselves." "We did not really have a choice," I said. "Sharon was not going to stop until someone stopped her. Maybe, but we were the ones who actually did it. That took courage." I had not thought of it that way. In the moment, it had just felt like survival, like doing what we had to do to protect ourselves and our home. But Teresa was right. We could have given in, could have moved, could have let Sharon win through intimidation. Instead, we had fought back, and in doing so, we had changed an entire community. When we returned home, there was a letter waiting from the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Sharon had requested permission to send another letter. We discussed whether to accept it and decided we would. The first letter had at least shown some self-awareness. Maybe this one would too. The second letter was shorter than the first. "Dear Yates and Teresa," Sharon wrote, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I wanted you to know something. I have been going through intensive therapy here, and I have been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. This does not excuse what I did, but it helps explain it. I built my entire identity around being perfect and making everything around me perfect. And when you challenged that by having a legitimate reason not to follow my timeline, something broke in me. My therapist says I saw you as a threat to my entire worldview, and I responded with escalating aggression because I did not know how else to handle it. I am learning better now. I am learning that perfection is not possible and that other people are not obstacles to be controlled. I am learning what real community means. Ironically, here in prison where everyone has to figure out how to live together, despite very different backgrounds and values. I am not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how badly I failed, not just you, but everyone in Oakwood Hills. I made people afraid to live in their own homes. That is the opposite of what a community should be. I hope the HOA is better now. I hope people are not afraid anymore. And I hope someday I can be the kind of person who builds communities up instead of tearing them down. Sharon. We read the letter together, and this time Teresa seemed more moved by it. I think she really is changing, Teresa said. Or at least trying to, maybe. It is hard to know if it is genuine or just something she has learned to say. Does it matter? If she serves her time, does her therapy, and comes out a better person, that is a good thing even if the motivation is self-serving. I had to admit Teresa had a point. Sharon would be in prison for at least another 2 years, possibly more if she did not get parole. That was a lot of time to reflect and change. Whether she actually would remain to be seen, but at least she was trying. We did not respond to the letter. There was nothing we could say that would be helpful. Sharon had to work through her own issues and serve her sentence. Our job was to move forward with our lives, and we did. Summer brought neighborhood barbecues and block parties, events that the old HOA board would never have allowed. The new board encouraged community gathering and even allocated funds for a neighborhood picnic in August. It was a revelation, seeing people actually enjoying living in Oakwood Hills rather than treating it like a museum where nothing could be out of place. At the picnic, I talked with neighbors I had only known by sight before. They told stories of their own encounters with Sharon over the years. Linda from Cherry Lane had been threatened with fines because her rose bushes were 2 inches taller than HOA standards allowed. David from Maple Ridge had received a violation notice because his trash cans were visible from the street for 20 minutes after the truck came. Maria from Oak Court had been cited because her children's chalk drawings on the driveway were visible for 3 days after a rain. She made everyone miserable, Linda said. But no one wanted to be the first to complain because we all saw how she went after people who challenged her. You two taking her on made it possible for the rest of us to breathe. It was strange to think of ourselves as having liberated the neighborhood, but in a way, we had. Not intentionally, not as some grand plan, but simply by refusing to be bullied and by insisting on following the actual rules rather than Sharon's arbitrary interpretations. As fall approached again, the 2nd anniversary of the snowstorm drawing near, I realized I had not thought about Sharon in weeks. She had gone from dominating our lives and thoughts to being just a memory, a bad chapter that was over. The security cameras still watched our property, but I rarely checked the footage anymore. The restraining order was still in effect, but Sharon was in prison and would be for a while yet. We were safe, and more than that, we were free. In October, we got news that Sharon had been denied early parole. Her therapist had written a strong letter supporting her release, noting her progress in treatment. But the parole board had determined that given the severity of her crimes, particularly the attempted arson, she should serve at least 3 full years before being considered again. Her next parole hearing would be in 2 years. Part of me felt sorry for her, spending an additional year in prison when she seemed to be genuinely trying to change. But another part, the part that remembered watching her on our security footage with a crowbar and gasoline, thought 3 years was getting off light for trying to burn down our house. Teresa had no such ambivalence. She tried to kill us, Yates. Maybe not directly, but burning down a house while you think people might be inside. That is attempted murder in my book. She can serve every day of her 5 years as far as I am concerned. The years moved on. The HOA continued to function well under its reformed structure. Patricia Morrison served her 2 terms as president and was replaced by David Chen, who maintained the same community-focused approach. The bylaws stood firm, and there were no abuses of authority, no harassment campaigns, no residents driven to desperation by petty enforcement. Oakwood Hills became known in the area as an example of how an HOA should operate. Real estate agents used it as a selling point. New residents moved in specifically because they had heard about the community's commitment to reasonable governance and neighborly cooperation. Teresa and I stayed in our house, the one Sharon had tried to burn down, and made it fully our own. We renovated the kitchen, updated the bathrooms, and planted a garden in the backyard. Each improvement felt like an act of defiance against Sharon's attempt to drive us out. This was our home, and we were not leaving. On February 3rd, 3 years after the original snowstorm, Minnesota got another big dump of snow. I went out to shovel, taking my time, enjoying the quiet work. No one was timing me. No one was taking photos. No one was waiting to pounce on a violation. It was just me, clearing my driveway, taking care of my property, being a good neighbor. When I finished, I looked at our house, with its fixed window and secure locks and watching cameras. It had been a battlefield once, the site of a crazy person's obsession and rage. But it was just a house again now, a home where we lived and laughed and planned our future. Sharon Patterson was still in prison and would be for another several months. Eventually, she would be released, and she would have to figure out how to rebuild her life. But that was her journey, not ours. We had moved on. The snow continued to fall, covering everything in white, making the whole neighborhood look fresh and new. Tomorrow it would all need to be cleared again, and I would do it, following the rules, being reasonable, treating it as the minor chore it was rather than some test of worth or obedience. That night, Teresa and I sat in our living room, warm and safe, watching the snow through the window. The HOA newsletter sat on the coffee table, full of community news and upcoming events. Our neighbors' houses glowed with light, families living their lives without fear. "You ever regret not moving after everything happened?" I asked Teresa. She thought about it, then shook her head. "No. This is our home. We fought for it and we won. That means something." She was right. It meant everything. And as the snow fell softly outside, covering the sidewalks that had started all the trouble, I thought about how something so simple had spiraled so far, and how we had survived it, and how life goes on. The story of Sharon Patterson and the snow that was not shoveled fast enough would fade into neighborhood legend eventually. A cautionary tale told to new residents about why the HOA was structured the way it was, and why reasonable enforcement mattered. But for us, it would always be more than a story. It was a reminder of what we had endured and overcome, of how far people could go when given unchecked authority, and of how important it was to stand up for yourself, even when it seemed easier to just comply. We had learned those lessons the hard way, through months of harassment and fear, and ultimately through watching someone being arrested in our backyard with tools to destroy our home. But we had learned them, and we had survived, and we were stronger for it. And that was enough. That was everything. We were home and we were safe, and the snow outside was just snow, nothing more.